The Whooping Crane Chronicles is a collection of stories to learn from, to ponder, and to celebrate. I'm Mike Forsberg, a conservation photographer from the Great Plains. I've spent the last 5 years, camera in hand, exploring the natural history of whooping cranes across the continent, meeting the people who love them, and discovering how these tall, magnificent, and rarest of cranes are navigating our 21st century world. This podcast elevates conservation stories and uplifts these birds to showcase their natural history and beauty in the hope of keeping these birds around for generations to come. Join me on the journey. I'm here with Dan and Cathy Holzman in the Baraboo Hills, the beautiful Baraboo Hills of, I guess, south central part of Wisconsin, not far from Baraboo. It's a beautiful day, and it's August 14th, 2024. I'm really glad to be back here with these folks because I've got to know the Holzmans. I believe it was back in 2020. Mutual friend of ours.
Wow, time flies.
George Archibald.
No kidding.
George's co-founder of the International Crane Foundation, which is right up the road from here. George introduced me to the Holzmans and told me about this special occurrence of a couple whooping cranes that had chosen to nest across the road out in the marsh, and were utilizing you all's property every day, and so I came out here because I really couldn't believe it. I had to see it for myself, and there it was. And you guys let me camp on your land.
Yep.
I camped right over by the barn there.
Yes, you did.
I took a nice picture of the barn actually in the middle of the night with the stars out and all that, and had my first experience up close with whooping cranes. That was the first time that I had been really close to whooping cranes. I'd seen them on the Platte.
Really?
Where I'm from several times, but never really that close, and I'd never seen them in the nesting season before.
Wow.
So I'm just thinking about that now. It's pretty cool to be able to say that I'm here with all that, where all that started.
You got up early and you went down there and saw them.
Yeah. Used a blind of a neighbor of yours, and George showed me the way, and ended up spending, I don't know what it was, several days photographing that pair. And then I came back, and I was counting in my journals. I kept a bunch of journals during this 5-year project, and I've been up here 6 times.
Wow.
Since all that started, and it's good to be up here again. For our listeners, I don't want them to listen to me talk. I'd like them to get to know a little bit more about you all and what your stories are and so forth. So I think we'll just start with some basics. Let's hear your background, Cathy. Where are you from and born and raised?
This farm here has been in the family for over 100 years. I don't know how long really, but for a long time. And my grandpa came here first.
Probably over 150 now.
It probably is, yeah.
Because we've been here 50 years.
Yeah, and Mom and Dad moved south to Arkansas at one point. And then everybody else was kind of settled in Madison or other places. And then I met Daniel working at Skila. And, well, eventually we got married. And so then the Mom and Dad let us buy the farm. So that's where we've been ever since. So. And my cousins live across, and they farm the land. Daniel worked in the prison systems for a while, and I worked at a hospital for people and then for animals, and we're really lucky.
Yeah, we're lucky to be here.
Yep.
You two have lived here for 50 years. Just thereabouts,
yeah,
right?
Yes,
Yeah, 50 years. Been married for 50 years. Moved here soon after we married, yep.
And you seem to both have just this real love for wildlife and the land.
That nature is my church. That's,
Yeah.
And all the critters around us. And we have everything here.
Did you grow up with the love for wildlife, Dan?
Yeah, I always loved the wildlife, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a church.
The wildlife?
I love the wildlife. Yep, I love wildlife. Yeah, I went. Well, my dad was in the Air Force, so I traveled all over. And I think where I really fell in love with the wildlife was in Panama, in the Canal Zone, in
Really?
the rainforest and that. We walk around.
You were sad to leave, weren't you?
Yeah, I was sad when we moved to New Jersey. But when you're in the military, you gotta move all over the place. But there'd be boa constrictors all over, and it was amazing. And then of course black panthers and so on and so forth. So,
And the
so
birds.
it was cool. And our folks are really, really crappy at watching us. They let us run all over the place. We're lucky we didn't die, because like there are coral snakes and fertilances and everything else down there. But we made it.
You were telling me a little bit ago, before we started having our conversation, about the butterflies and about the dragonflies. Can you
Yeah.
tell me about those again. The butterfly
Oh,
explosion that you guys
yeah. And
They were kind of migrating through, probably.
saw. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and what's the name of those butterflies?
Monarchs.
The monarchs. Yeah.
7-acre field full of monarchs.
I mean, you can't picture
Full.
it probably, but it was just
Full, like-
miraculous.
Like in a space from you to me, there'd be like 10 monarchs.
Do
It
you?
was amazing.
I mean, I imagine you see something new every single day when you wake up out here.
Well,
don't you?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I mean, we're in a landscape it's a rural landscape. It's an agricultural landscape.
And we own woods.
Right. So you have woods and you have prairie and you have marsh and there's corn
Right,
and there's beans and then there's your place and a number of other places that I mean,
and it always makes the show really good. You get up in the morning, you look out in the field, and there's 2 whoopers. They're just a majestic, uplifting creature. Yeah.
well, let's talk about because I don't know this part of the story. I don't know about when they first showed up here, and can you tell me about that and what the first sight of them was? What's your recollection of the?
I was looking out that window right there.
That's on the
Yep.
side of your house,
and of course it was springtime.
so what time?
April's when they come
Yeah,
usually.
it was springtime. I was looking out there, and the cranes and that always stop off here. And,
Those
and
sandhill
stop.
cranes.
Sandhill cranes, everything. And I looked out there, and I saw it looked like 3 white cranes flying. And so then I called up the ICF, and I said, I think I saw 3 white cranes out here, three whoopers. Anyway, turned out that the light was hitting the one just right, so it was 2 whoopers chasing a sandhill probably.
Yeah, yeah.
And the light, at that, looking to the south, the light was hitting his back just right that he looked white too,
Yep.
or he or she. So anyway, so that's the first time we saw him. And that
Were you
was the same-
were you surprised?
Oh yeah, I never thought I'd see a whooping crane. I knew they were endangered. I knew about ICF. I knew, for years and years they've been trying to rehabilitate them, bring them back, but I never thought that they would actually come back, that I'd be able to see one in this area,
Yeah, and then they nest in my cousin's
The
field.
marsh.
Yeah, the marsh there. Yeah.
What did you think about that when they decided to stay?
I thought
Well, I
it was
just went with it.
amazing. It was amazing. And then I remembered that story that it was like in 98 or 97. They wanted to put a big power line right through the middle of the marsh. And I went to talk to Cub, the political people and that, and they had 3 lines they wanted to go through, and they wanted one to go right through the middle of the marsh. And I went and I talked to them. I was the only one talking about the marsh, bumps or nobody else. And I said, you can't put a power line through the middle of the marsh. That's a refuge. That's a wildlife refuge. I said the geese are flying through there, the cranes are flying through there. You put a power line, it's going to wreck the whole marsh, and they'll be hitting it and they'll be dying and so on and so forth. And the one lady listened to me, and she came out one night. We sat down by that pond, and it was in the fall, and they're migrating through, and they're all making their noise and everything else, and so she talked the rest of the board into putting the line over there, going to Baraboo rather than.
And of course, our neighbors over there said, thanks a lot.
Because it went right next to one of my buddy's houses. But anyway, and then that's the very marsh that those guys moved into, like it was probably like
Oh, yeah.
5-7 years later. But anyway, I gave the papers to George so he could see how they decided. They said the power lines would be an obstruction to the cranes and so on and so forth, and they decided not to do it. And that was the main reason they didn't put the power line through there, was that marsh right there that the Crane Foundation has now bought. It's like 44
Oh, you hadn't heard that, huh?
No, it
Yeah,
wasn't too
they
long
bought
ago.
40 acres, and they bought that little triangle. That's
Okay.
that's all crane land now, and they want the
no
farmers to keep mowing it so it stays in good shape.
Right.
And so, yeah,
That's great.
his friend from the Milwaukee Sentinel Journal,
Yeah.
who is an outdoor writer,
Mm-hmm.
and his wife and he are well off. They wanted to leave something to what is it, prodigy, or what do you say? When you want to
Legacy?
leave- legacy. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, they wanted to have a little legacy, so they bought that land and gave it to the Crane Foundation.
And my cousins were glad to sell it because they said you can't farm marshes anyway.
Right.
He didn't appreciate it at all. I always loved that marsh. I always thought it was
Oh,
the
yeah.
coolest marsh there is, because I love the migrations. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, it was amazing. So now the Crane Foundation has it. Everything going to be developed, and they're gonna mow the grass to keep the weeds and noxious weeds out and stuff like that. So,
And also be able to see the coyotes and stuff easier.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah.
So you've been here for a long time. Whooping cranes showed up in your life half a dozen years ago,
74,
maybe something
73.
like that, right? When was it?
Oh, I know.
Yeah. We came here in like 73, 74.
Right. So did you have sandhill cranes here?
No, there were no
Nesting?
sound.
But
hills
they were
around.
here. They were here before the.
The whoopers, yeah.
Yeah.
But see, George says, hey, I never see sandhills around like that. And then the sandhills started coming back more and more.
And
I
they
see
think that the
sandhills now.
pair that were here with us for a few years, they think we're the start of all of these sandhills around here.
Okay.
And they're still alive.
George thought that.
What's the name? I mean, don't you have a name for that
Oh,
pair
yeah.
of sandhill?
Yeah, it's Matt and Annie.
Matt,
Yeah.
Matt and Annie?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, actually, he has a
friend.
friends. And I
And
named
Matt
him.
and Annie are close like
Do Matt and Annie?
And I don't know if they,
friends?
they
No, do they
appreciate
know?
me
Yeah,
having
yeah.
a
Yeah, I told
sandhill
them.
named
I
after
told them they were honored.
Yeah,
Were they?
good.
Yeah, I said, yeah, we got a pair of sandhills that comes around. We call them Matt and Annie, and they were all happy about it.
So were Matt and Annie the sandhill cranes
Yep.
that were over here in the
Those
marsh
are the
that
ones
got?
you saw attack the other one, because
Okay.
Cloud and Spirit, and they had Sheena then too.
Now wait a minute.
Cloud and
Cloud-
Spirit are the whoopers,
Okay.
and Sheena is the interloper.
Cloud's sister.
Yeah, something like that.
It
I don't
sounds
know.
like a soap opera.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah, it was.
Yeah, Sheena.
She did not want to leave.
And those three would drive those two whoopers, the two sandhills out of this area. And you saw the one day when you were filming over there, you saw the female, you saw Annie. Cloud was right on Matt's butt, and Annie came up from the ground and hit him in the side.
Right.
And you were out there with the camera to film it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So for the people that are listening that are trying to keep track of all of this, it's like trying to understand the young and the restless.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
As
complicated
the world
family
turns.
dynamics.
So let me see if I get this right, okay? Annie and Matt were the resident sandhill cranes here
Yep.
that have been here for a long time.
Yep.
And they had the marsh was there.
And they had that central spot in the marsh.
That was their place. And
Yeah.
then in 2020 or whenever
yeah,
it was,
2020, yeah.
the not two whooping cranes, but three whooping
Three
cranes
whooping
showed up,
cranes.
right? And that was Cloud and Spirit and Sheena.
Sheena.
Now Cloud is the,
Now think about that, because
Hang on.
I told them I saw three whooping cranes. I said, no, there's two
Yeah.
whooping cranes. There's that. I might have seen three whooping cranes
you could have, yeah.
because there were three.
So first of all, so Cloud is the male, and Spirit
Is his wife.
is his wife. And then Sheena is Cloud's sister.
Well, now you're saying they don't know for sure?
I don't know if she's sister or
Well, that's what George used to tell me.
yeah, sister, or I don't know if
At the very least, she's the interloper.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Oh,
they
yeah.
because Cloud and Spirit are the pair that they
Right.
would like to see for
Right.
whatever reason together because they think that
because they're
Sheena-
not rated. They're not related.
That's right. So Sheena's
Okay.
related some. So this is
Supposed
like
to be.
Game of Thrones now.
It is. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And they had to work really hard to get Sheena to stay away because she did not want to leave.
Yeah, here's what happened. I think it was like 3 years ago or so, because Sheena's not with them anymore. Because Sheena would come up there was like 2 or 3 years. Sheena would be around with them all the time, and and they'd be sort of sparring a little bit, this and that, and then Spirit lost her eye because Sheena hit her in the eye, I think, and that's what George thinks at least. And then Sheena came back and Cloud came back, and George was because Spirit wasn't there, so George was pretty sunk. But then Spirit showed up like 3 or 4 days later, had a fight, and drove off Sheena.
Yep.
And then that's
And then
It is Game of Thrones. that's for sure.
in between, they captured Sheena once, and they took her up to that marsh
Necedah,
up
didn't
north.
they?
Yeah, to
Yeah,
Necedah.
and
And
that
took her
wasn't
up to
good enough.
Necedah. And George was happy because they caught her, took her up to Necedah, and then the other two could get along. 2 or 3 days later, I called George because I saw her down there. I said, George, I think Sheena's back. and she was back. But then that one year when they camped in the spring, and Sheena and Cloud were there, then Spirit came 2 or 3 days later and drove Sheena away, and that's it. Sheena's up there now.
Yeah, and I think has found a mate herself.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what we heard
Yeah.
anyway.
which is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So who named these?
Me,
Okay.
I'm the namer.
So where did Cloud and Spirit and Sheena come from?
Well, Cloud and Spirit just because they're white,
Yeah.
mostly.
Yeah.
And Spirit does seem to have a really motherly attitude.
And Sheena, because she's an interloper.
Oh, right, and she's a
And-
fighter because
and there's a little
before she was
population, too.
left, they would fight off the cranes and she'd fight off whoever showed up. So she's a fighter. So then I remember that Sheena, the warrior princess. Remember that old show? So
Yeah.
that's where Sheena came from.
God.
She is the warrior.
Maybe it's
pretty weird people, eh?
Sheena the warrior princess. Yeah, I
Yep.
remember that. Yeah.
Yep.
Boy.
That blows that interview. Your producer.
We're gonna have like
He's
one of
shaking
those-
his head now. He's had it.
Oh wait.
Yep.
Okay, we're here in sandhill cranes right
Yep.
now that are off on the other side of the road down the marsh. So could that be Matt and
Could be.
Annie?
Could be Matt and Annie.
Although I haven't seen
Yeah,
that.
yeah. That's Matt and Annie. There must be. Sometimes there was like 3 or 4 here together.
So what we're
But-
hearing is
but-
a guard call
Yeah,
right now. So they're alert
but
about
what
something.
if you listen? Then you might hear a unison call from the whoopers.
Yeah.
Might.
Sounds like they're flying.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Because that's going pretty fast. Well, all right. So I'm going to go back to 2020, the first time I came out here and I camped on your land and photographed Cloud and Spirit at the nest. And at the time, they had a chick, and that chick, they've tried to have a chick every year. They've I think almost every year they've had one, and every year something gets that
It's
chick,
something.
right? In 2020 was the year that the chick made it the longest.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, he
was
was
over
showing
it.
color and
And we call them golden.
Is that what you
Yeah,
called it?
yeah, because they would always
And-
come
and the
about
sunlight.
6 o'clock in the morning. They'd come across and they'd be in that lighter green area,
Uh-huh.
and the sun would hit him, and it was just like he was covered with gold. It was
Yeah.
just beautiful every morning. So I go in my garage and I'd wait and watch so I could see him come, because it was always so cool to see him stand there with that little baby, and he'd have a golden light on him.
Yeah.
But then that day he didn't come, and we knew that was that.
Well, I remember watching him. So you guys live close to a road
Mm-hmm.
that has a fair amount of traffic.
Oh,
on it,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you put out a lot of signs, slow people down.
Yeah.
Some do, and some don't.
Yeah.
probably, right?
Yeah.
But what I was amazed at was watching Mom and Dad escort that chick
Oh,
across
I
the
know.
road
They're good.
every time. I mean, there was a very deliberate. They just weren't running across like a bunch of chickens.
No.
You know, I mean, they were looking both ways.
Oh,
And they were waiting to
there's-
make sure there wasn't any cars coming.
It is amazing that they don't get hit, because we have these huge trucks going by and they go fast.
Thing is, they're pretty darn smart.
They are.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they always talk about dumb birds, but they're not dumb.
No.
Not at all.
No, that's smart. But you know, they lost their chicks. They lose the chicks. But 2 of the years they took eggs down. ICF goes down there to their nest.
But they are good whenever they're coming around to do whatever. They'll say, you know, we're going to be around. Is that okay? And you know, they're
very
real
nice.
good about that.
We love it that they're so dedicated.
Not that they have to, because we don't worry about them
they
coming
take
around.
they take care of those birds so well, and they're looking out for them all the time. So they go down there and they grab the egg, and the egg is still warm and ready to go, and they put it in an incubator and hatch it out. And then I think they hatched them here. Even though a chick is lost, you feel good that one chick made it.
Right.
Because of ICFs coming in and taking them. Otherwise, there would have been no egg, no nothing, you know.
That's right. So that's
And 2 chicks is a lot to take care of when you can't take care of one.
yeah. So you're really increasing the odds
Yep.
of whooping crane's next generation by taking, up here anyway, by taking one egg out of the nest and ensuring that it'll hatch, and then hoping that the parents of the remaining egg can focus all of their energy and attention on that one. And you know what? One of
have
these
it get
days
through.
it's going to happen here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, one of these days it will.
It's great. I mean, what they do is amazing. I was really amazed when I saw them dress up in their suits the first time they caught, that's when they caught Spirit. And
They dressed up in whooping crane
Yep,
suits.
yep.
Yeah, right out here. They all dressed up in whooping crane suits, and they threw some food out. Probably back because they came from here originally.
Yeah.
So
right.
probably back the same thing, and they fell for it once, and they got transplanted. But since then,
No, they
no,
can't.
the wolfing crane suits don't do it because they're smart. You know, they're smart birds. Those aren't the cranes we know.
Yeah, I guess with these birds, a lot of them are captive raised that then end up in this population. And so if they're raised by
Yeah.
bird keepers
Yeah.
at ICF,
Yeah,
they don't see the bird keepers in their costumes as mom and dad necessarily, but they necessarily don't
Right.
think they're a threat either,
Right,
do they?
right.
Yeah, so they're used to them. So I have seen 2 of those chicks that they had taken as eggs, all grown up, and they're both in Louisiana.
Oh, that's
isn't that cool?
very cool.
One of them is named Fog.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
They're down in Louisiana. We'll talk to those folks too. Down at the Audubon Species Survival Center down there, they'll captive rear birds, and then they'll release them into a place called White Lake Wetland Conservation Area, which is in southwest Louisiana, and that is a historic. It has historically they had a non-migratory whooping crane population right down in the heart of the bayou in Cajun country.
Wow.
And then in 1950, they were down to 5 birds. And then a hurricane took out 4 of the 5.
Oh,
They captured the 5th one, took it over to Aransas, and had it in a captive situation there. And then it ended up eventually passing. And so that population disappeared
wow. And
And
how
that-
long had they been there?
forever. Yeah.
Oh, that must have been so sad.
It was sad. I think it was at the time, that happened right at the time in the 1940s that the wood buffalo to Aransas population was down to less than 20 birds. So we had there were less than 20 birds in the world,
Ugh.
whooping cranes in the 1940s up until
Yeah.
about 50 or so. And then they started to come back and climb back. And so, these birds in that wood buffalo to Aransas corridor are now about 530 birds.
Wow.
And here in Wisconsin, this population, they're sitting around 75 or so right now. And the Louisiana population is sitting at about 80 right now. But 2 of the birds from here are down there. And one of them is out in the wild and doing pretty well.
Good.
Fog, he was the 2022 bird. So he was one of the eggs when Spirit had her eye poked out or whatever happened there, and she abandoned the nest.
Yeah.
He was one of the eggs. Can't remember if they hatched him here and then moved him down to Louisiana, or they moved the egg down and hatched him there. But when he was born, they noticed a congenital defect in his wing, and so they knew they'd never be able to release him into the wild. But he's now a 3-year-old, 4-year-old almost bird. He's a model bird for other birds down there. He stands really tall. He's a sweetheart, and he's doing good work down there.
Wow.
And I'll show some. I don't have the pictures with me, but we do a little story in the book about fog.
Oh, I bet.
And that connects then people here in Wisconsin to people down in Louisiana, and then that backstory of the birds from wood buffalo. So, so that's pretty neat. When we were talking about the whooping cranes fighting with the sandhills over here on the other side of the road, that day I remember George had said, and you guys had thought maybe that the two sandhills maybe didn't have chicks, that maybe the chicks had failed because you hadn't seen them for such a long time.
And you saw the 2 chicks that day.
And they wandered them out for the first time, and that it was the corn was really, really short.
And both of them made it all the way.
They did that.
They made it all the way, and they went south with their parents.
And when they went south, we were standing out by the barn. Why were we out there? They were.
We're just.
people
It was just a
Well,
day. We were out
anyway.
working by the barn.
We saw them come flying, and they flew around, and they came back over us and called, and then they went off south.
Goodbye, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, and the whoopers did
But
the
we
same.
were always pretty
The
close
whoopers
to
did
them.
the same thing one year.
Yeah.
I was here. And I was looking, and I looked up in the sky.
Yes.
And I
He
saw.
got the circle.
I saw the 3 whoopers, and they were just real high. They're making probably, I'd say, 100-foot circle.
And
And
George
they
says,
did
"What
they did
about
like
that?"
they did like 7 times. They just circled right over, and then they were going.
Kettling up, and then they went.
Yeah.
Yeah, and George says that's
It's called kettling.
in the Eastern people think that's a
if they-
blessing. I guess.
They have to fly over their fields to give them a blessing. The Buddhists and stuff say that it's a blessing. And then one time too, I was working out in the garden there, and they flew over me like 10 feet high. It was kind of cool. They were going up that way to the marsh up there, I guess.
So what's it like when you see them come back in the spring?
Well,
We were worried
no.
because this year Matt came back, and Matt was walking around here calling.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Oh,
and we didn't see any Annie. And Matt was walking around
no.
calling. We thought, oh no, something happened to Annie. And then Cathy was worried by the barn again.
Yeah.
I think she's by the barn again, and she looked out there, and Matt was out there calling.
Calling
Right
and
out
calling.
there, calling and calling and calling. And then all of a sudden, Annie flew in.
I said, well, she was just
So-
3 days late. She
So
came 3
so we
days
saw
after.
we saw him hit their reunion 3 days later. It's just amazing.
Isn't that something?
They're amazing.
Yeah. Did you know that Cloud and Spirit, going back to the whoopers for a minute, I found them down in Kentucky.
Wow.
That was 2 years ago. I went down because of the old telemetry of one of the birds. They knew roughly what valley the 3 had been hanging out in, but nobody had ever put eyes on him. And so I was down in Louisiana, drove up north. I wanted to see if I could find him. And then I was heading to a place called Goose Pond,
Goose Pond.
in Indiana, where a lot of these eastern flyway birds will spend some time. For 2 days I looked, and I found them on the second day. And the pictures aren't great, but they're
Just
there.
Think of that. Just think of
Sent
that.
those to George, and that was the year actually that Cloud came back, but Spirit was late,
Yep.
that you talked about earlier. I thought maybe she had died because they had a huge tornado that went through the place that they winter down there in Kentucky.
Wow.
But she survived. So yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
I'm-
we were worried.
George was worried that it was going to be Sheena and Cloud, and there was no Spirit.
yeah. I'm just always fascinated. I mean, we're sitting here talking about birds that we're talking about, like our
They're like, yeah.
family or friends,
Well,
or neighbors.
I mean, they have personalities. Animals aren't that much different.
Yeah. You all, I know, are very quiet ambassadors for these birds and for nature in general here. What do other folks think about these birds? You know, what about the other people? in
Well, the
valley
farmers,
here?
it's kind of difficult
Yeah.
because, well, and not so much for the hoopers, of course, because there aren't that many, but for the sandhills, they don't like it because there are a lot of them, and they
There's
get
lots.
in their fields.
There's lots of people in the community that stop by, and we see them year after year. because they just love going
Yeah.
down there and watching the whoopers and watching the sandhills, and they stop in and say hi and so on and so forth.
So
Year
you
after
met
year.
some people, made some friends through these birds?
Oh, yeah. Made some friends, met some people. And, of course, with the craniacs around, too, some of these people are just crazy about the birds, you know. I'd say all in all, they're pretty good, and people respect them, and they see them, and they're happy when they come back. And for the most part, people drive pretty well
Yeah.
when they're around them.
Yeah.
So I think they feel good about them. The whole thing is sometimes legislatures and the thing is there's a big push. Oh, there's so many cranes we want.
They want to hunt.
They want to hunt the
I
sandhills.
tell you.
And that's crazy. I mean, those are they're exotic, they're wonderful, they're spiritual birds, and it just drives me nuts to think about that. But that's a big push, and they're claiming that there's crop damage in that. But anyway, so far they haven't done it. But there's a lot of pressure because they see them and they see. I mean, it used to be Canadian geese because at Pine Island they used to have the geese there. At Pine Island they used to feed them everything, so we'd see Canadian geese all over. Just thousands of Canadian geese. Now you see some Canadian geese, but you see thousands and thousands of sandhills. And so, of course, people, oh, there's too many of them, blah, blah, blah. But
They were here before we were.
Yeah.
they're wonderful. Yeah.
Tell me about your relationship with George Archibald.
I remember the first time I saw him.
So George, for our listeners, is the co-founder of the International Crane Foundation, and he started that organization, he and his friend Ron Sowie,
Yep.
over 50 years ago now.
Yep.
So 51 years.
That's kinda hard to believe.
About-
Which is the same time you guys moved here.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I interrupted you, though. The
Oh.
first time you met George.
Well, this was the second year, and I don't know. I was outside and I saw the hoopers come in, and this would be the second year that they've been here, and so I'm just sitting right at the driveway there, watching them, and I'm just gaga because I don't know. This is the only second time I've seen them. They come back, and then this car came up and stopped. And he started walking toward me, and I said, "I bet you're George." And he says, "Yes, I am." And so I introduced myself, and we stood and talked for a while. And that was the first time I saw George, because he must have heard that they were back too. And
Yeah. Yeah.
So then, ever since then, been
Yeah, he's a
Good
great
friends.
guy.
Yeah.
yeah,
You remember the COVID year where, I mean, George he's always gone.
yeah,
You know,
Yeah.
he's like Jane Goodall. You know, he's
Yeah.
300 days a year. or
definitely.
whatever,
That's a
right?
good. Yeah,
But COVID year, he had to stay home.
yeah,
They grounded him, and so he ended up watching these birds and going back to his early days as a field biologist,
Yeah.
as a crane biologist. So, and he would go sit up on the opposite hill there in the manure spreader.
yeah.
Remember that, or
Yeah.
else he'd be in the blind down
Yeah.
here sometimes.
Yeah.
But every day, and he took notes, and it was back to his old-fashioned days of observations with
Always
the
saw a lot
spotting
of
scope,
stuff.
and I'd never seen a guy so in his element in my
Yeah.
life, and he
Yeah.
did some really good science.
He did some good writing. He wrote some good journaling.
Yeah, he
good
did.
journaling. Yeah.
I think sometimes we go out looking for nature, but sometimes nature finds us, and I
Yeah.
think with cranes, I think they find you.
Yeah,
You
it
know.
does seem like it, doesn't it?
and not just Cloud and Spirit and even
Matt and
even
Annie.
Sheena, but Matt and Annie, and then all the other sandhills that you guys have here that are here. Some of them are here during summer, some are just passing through.
Yeah.
And then think about all the geese and the ducks and the other water birds,
Mhm.
and then your turkeys and your
Oh, yeah,
monarchs
the
and your dragonflies
Yeah.
and your deer and
Yeah.
your coyotes and your groundhogs and
George was down there once, and he had this songbird app. He had it on.
yeah, that Merlin app maybe.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
listens.
Yeah. Anyway, he said he had like 35 songbirds.
Yep.
Just in that little bit of time that he was down there in the
Hmm.
marsh.
Isn't that
Amazing.
something? I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. But you've seen lots of birds down there too,
I have.
because you take lots of pictures.
I take too many pictures. Way too
Never
many.
enough.
Never enough.
Well, I appreciate you
Thanks,
taking
Mike.
the time to talk today.
Oh, we can talk about this forever, you know.
Yeah.
It's fun.
This is the Whooping Crane Chronicles. In this podcast series, I will have conversations with the scientists, artists, landowners, and others that I have met along my journey, who all have a shared connection with their love for whooping cranes. Stay tuned, and thank you for joining.